Welcome back to Key Connections for Educators. I'm really glad you've joined us for today's discussion. We're going to be talking about Kirkpatrick again. We started with level 1 evaluations last episode, and today we're going to continue into level 2 evaluations. If you missed that episode, you might want to go back and check it out. One of the things that got cut for time was a small discussion that Hannah and I had around a question that I really like using, and it has to do with confidence. So after attending this class, how confident are you in your own ability to fill in the blank? Name the states and capitals of the United States of America. Finish this long division problem. Sell this insurance policy. Whatever it is. How confident are you in your ability to do that? I thought of that more of a level 1 evaluation because it has to do with my feelings about it. And Hannah was smart enough to point out that really that confidence issue could be a marker more of learning taking place and a change in my attitude towards my own abilities. And that really might be more appropriate in a level 2. So I wanted to point that out simply because we're going to discuss that today. Didn't want you to feel like you missed something, whether you listened to the episode or not. But I'm really looking forward to getting into the discussion and love to hear from you. How do you feel about a question like that? Is that a level 1 question for you? Is that a level 2 question? How could that potentially impact the way that you are measuring the learning that your students are going through? Looking forward to hearing from you.
How do you feel about level 2?
Level 2, I feel, is where we're really getting to the meat, really to the importance of that ROI. What did participants learn from the training, from the course? So with this, I was thinking of what I said before about the content of this course. Did it increase my understanding of the topic? And this is going back to what you shared about how confident am I feeling? Now, we can't base everything on feelings, but oftentimes we know, especially as adult students, where we are on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being I really don't feel confident in this, and 3 being, hey, I feel very confident. I could probably show or teach it to someone else. And then 2 being in the middle. I think that that's a great way that we as trainers and teachers can engage our students throughout the process. Again, thinking about my experience in operations as a trainer, when I was onboarding new hires, each Friday, I had a built-in just kind of personal evaluation opportunity for them to think through, okay, the key concepts that we learned this week. And then I always was building on. So I'd keep the concepts from the week before and then add the concepts from this week. And I'd have them put a 1, a 2, or a 3, depending on where they were feeling as they marched through those 6 weeks of onboarding. And that became a really empowering tool because they were assessing themselves. And then that was a tool that I could also see where they were at to help provide more support if I was seeing a lot of 1 repeatedly, or also to tap into mentors and managers of how we could better support that particular participant so that they were feeling more confident in the weeks to come because we were constantly adding on.
I think that's really smart. It's almost like a level 1 on your level 2, right?
Yeah.
Your reaction about what you're learning is almost as important as what you're learning, right?
It is. It really is.
Yeah. Something that I've been thinking about the past couple of years is actually measuring before a learning happens, whether or not people know things. So you think about like when you're in college, you can take a CLEP test and you don't even have to take Algebra 1 and American literature if you know it already, because what would be the point of sending you to a class if you already can pass the exam? The measurement in learning is nil because you started the class with 100% knowledge and you're ending it with 100% knowledge. Like, what was the point? That was a waste of money.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important in the world of education, but it's also important in the world of corporate training. This is a really interesting place that we can move the needle if we have things like pre-testing and not wasting training resources on things people already know. We are not going to do a training program on XYZ product if everyone in the entire organization can score 100% on this thing, assuming that the questions are good. We got to make sure the questions are good. But if 95% of my learners can answer this particular question correctly, it means that there's absolutely nothing that we did during the class.
Great point. I was thinking about that too as a prerequisite. And also when we're dealing with different teams, if we are all taking the same assessment, it can help us better differentiate between those who are going to need more foundational knowledge, those who are kind of in the middle. They know a lot, but they still have some more of the new that we're going to be teaching. And then those have really already mastered it. And really, they just need to learn the new piece or the extra technology that got added in. And so I think even as educators and instructional designers, we can think about differentiating our audience that way and almost using some of the foundational knowledge and thinking about how we can make that self-paced modules rather than it all be instructor-led live training. And that honors those who are in the middle or the higher end so that we are addressing where they're at in those live instructor-led training settings.
Yeah, I actually had a very good experience with an online class the other day. It was mandatory compliance training, so we all love those. And it had to do with privacy and what you can send people, what you can't send people. But they had an assessment up front. It was 10 questions. And if you could answer all 10 questions, you didn't have to take the class. Now, there was still, at the end, they still had a little thing that said you were going to abide by the terms and conditions and you're going to uphold compliance. And they gave access to all the modules if you wanted to go and dig deeper. I did not. So I skipped over that. But it was great because I could demonstrate that I've taken this every single year at the same company, right? I know what this stuff is. I don't need to necessarily take it again. And so that was really effective. And it helped me. I got in there and out of it in 7.5 minutes. And this is an hour class, right? And so that was really helpful.
And think about the user experience there. Like it honored you who knew the material, retained the material from year to year so that you didn't have to sit through 50 minutes of training. You had access to the content if you wanted to, but you, in a way, it honored you and your time by allowing you to move on because you already had mastered that knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say a knowledge check or a demonstration or a role play could be a level 2 learning evaluation, right? But I feel like any good test should probably reinforce the material that we were trying to train and learn on. And it really should go to the main things that we really wanted to see someone be able to demonstrate. So if you have a good test that's based on the learning outcomes, the learning objectives, and I can see someone has, demonstrated what I would want to see someone that has a good knowledge and understanding of this topic be able to demonstrate, that's a good test. I want your feedback on this, Hannah, because I also believe any good test should actually challenge most proficient people. And if we assume that even the most seasoned professionals, I only think 20% of them are going to get this question right. Most people are going to get this question wrong. Then we're actually not expecting people to get 100%. But that means that when we're doing an evaluation of the test itself, we can't say a 70% passes. It might be 70%. It might be 95%. It might be 50%. But what we need to do is we really need to figure out, what do we expect this test to be able to show us? And where is that right level of pass fail on something like a knowledge check? Because we're really specific about the questions and we're specific about how frequently we think the people that are taking this test will get that question right. Because if you have a test that everybody passes, I don't know that that's a good test. But I also don't think it's a good experience to have everyone fail it, right?
I have a lot of thoughts on it because where I'm starting is from my teaching experience in the public school. And when you develop tests or quizzes or projects or whatever you are evaluating your students' knowledge and learning from, it's got to tie back to the objectives. Did you actually teach this content? And does the student really understand this content at a level of proficiency or mastery or what have you? And in creating questions that always tie back to that, you really are creating trust and rapport between your learners and you as the educator. And so I really see that as intrinsic to training, even in the adult settings, because we want to create that psychological safety for students to take risks, for students to ask questions, and for students to feel like they are able to achieve that next step or that next piece And so by being candid with them and putting all the cards out on the table, I think we develop that trust, which I think is really important between educator and student. To your point, as far as every test should challenge students, I think you're right. I would actually question the definition of test in that. You know what I mean? Because I definitely think that every training, every class experience should challenge, but you're going to always have different students at different levels. And so if every single question on a test was challenging, it might really meet my high students right where they're at. And I'm just, again, thinking about my lower level groups and my mid groups, how that might create a negative morale situation. But should those questions be maybe weighted the same as the rest of the questions? Or would that be a bonus question or a challenge question or something outside the normal standardized rubric, so that those who would not be able to volley or get the right answer on that challenge question don't feel defeated? Because there is that piece of it that we need to address as educators, because we're emotional beings. And so having that experience and then always feeling like I can never get 100%, that can be a morale deflator.
Yeah. And I think that's really important when we're talking through this. This is the place where we're saying just because you have 10 questions doesn't mean that getting one wrong means you have a 90%. You could get 9 out of 10 and still get an A. And that one question is weighted differently because we know how challenging that question is. And we expect that most people are not going to get this right. And we're not also going to throw your GPA out the window just because you couldn't answer it. That wasn't the point. And we're also not going to create a test bank with only those questions because no one would come to the class again. Your level ones would go right down the toilet, right? No one wants to take this because Hannah and Nate have unreasonable expectations of what people are going to learn. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, where do you use those challenge questions? How to use those? And maybe what's the right way to embed those in a safe way that isn't going to humiliate people, but also is going to challenge people? Because I think that's the rub there. We want to make sure that people are doing it. Really, a good test should really reinforce my confidence in my ability to perform whatever it was that I learned. It should reinforce the learning objectives. And so at the end of the day, we should be able to ask that question of confidence, and that test should be part of that, or that assessment or that role play or whatever it is. That should be part of that, where I go, oh yeah, watching myself do well on that 10 question exam or that role play or whatever the assessment was really helped me see my learning, really helped me feel like I mastered this particular concept or this skill or this idea. And so I feel good. I feel like I have what it takes to move on. And I think that's really what we're looking for in level 2 is, do you have what it takes to move on and apply it in the real world?
2 ideas came to mind as you were talking there. One was we could actually be fair with our trainees and students by putting how many points each question would be, so that students are well aware, okay, this is a 3-point question opposed to this is a 1-point question. And understand that difference like right up from the get-go. Then the other piece of it is, are we giving those challenge questions because we're actually measuring endurance, or we're measuring grit, or we're measuring how the individual collaborated or used their skills to get to a result? And if that's part of it, because I'm even thinking about math problems and those multi-step problems, oftentimes I would weight those that have 3 points for those questions, because depending on how many steps a student went through that were correct on a long division problem, I would give them the 1 point out of 3 or the 2 points out of 3, even if the end result still was wrong. So the student could actually go back and go, oh, my thinking was right here and here. It's just here where I went wrong. And so I think, again, by really, what are we measuring? That's where we can, as trainers, build outstanding level 2 learning questions.
I just love that, because the kid that makes a small arithmetic error on the first function of that long division is never going to get the answer right. But if their process was right after that, give that person credit, man. That's that, like, circle the error and then you get 2 out of 3 points for it. I think that's huge. I think that's huge. I had a professor once that said every single test and every single quiz is going to be open book. And we were thrown. We're like, really? We don't need to know any of this stuff? And he said, I think to your point, he said, if you don't know this stuff, you won't be able to find it in the book. But if you know it and you need that extra little help to get you over the edge, the book's going to be great. Because in the real world, you can just go to the book. If I'm building an Excel table and I don't know how to do it, it's not like I just stop working and I'm just like, I guess I can't do it. No, you go on YouTube and you go search for how to make the formula and you get the answer and you finish your work. So like life is an open book test. And so I think there's certainly places for having closed book tests. I'm not saying that those aren't appropriate. When we can give those places where there's challenge questions and show your work and also let you use the calculator, let you use ChatGPT, just let me know that you're using it. Don't pretend it's yours.
How real life are these tests? And I think that as educators, we really should be thinking about that. As trainers, we should be thinking about that. And even referencing our previous episode on how training and education has evolved, we're no longer developing people just to memorize information anymore. We are really in the business of developing people who can think for themselves. And a lot of the workforce now, it's process driven and it's problem solving and it's collaboration. And to your point, it's how do I use my resources in order to tackle this problem?
Or why I would need to know this on the job. Just quizzing me on the product details without some sort of context. Hannah is a client of yours and she's got the following questions based on looking at the marketing materials. Okay. Now I know I'm answering these questions.
Yes. What's the bottom line here? And as educators in the public school system or in academia, what's the real world context?
Yeah.
Here?
What's the outcome?
Really? Yeah. What do we want the outcome to be for our students?
Yeah. So if we're able to measure it effectively and we're able to then show someone that they have learned something during the process of that, I think intuitively that level one is going to start to reflect that because they're going to believe that they have the skills. They're going to believe that it was useful. They're going to believe that there's value in that program. And we're starting to leave that trail for people that hold the purse strings and the budget to say, like, you can see that even though we haven't shown the impact, and we'll get to those, we don't have time for level 3 and 4 today, but we'll get to them eventually. We can start to draw that line to say there is going to be a correlation between education and outcomes. And that is where you find the real value and being able to demonstrate that what we're doing matters.
Because it does. It really does matter. So my call to action for you in the audience is to leave a comment and share with us what you learned from today's episode, what resonated with you that you can now take back to your classroom, to your training program, and implement or adapt or customize to your particular process for how you are measuring training's impact. Because the return on investment is there. It's up to us to capture it and then to effectively communicate it to those who know and need to know that it matters.